He's not working.
Can go.
Wait just a minute. Sorry, this was like a very last minute thing, getting bumped to this room.
It's all good.
A copy.
Yeah, someone was in here right before up until.
Oh, I
And
the meeting of the teams thing to this room.
It's been like 15-20 minutes before.
It's okay. I'm catching up on emails.
Okay, good.
Oh, I'm just looking in here.
Very late. We
Oh,
got late
no,
one.
it's okay, we didn't get this room until later, so
Okay.
we're just now setting up.
Hey, can everyone online hear us? All right, we're just having some internal video issues, but I will call this meeting to order and we can get moving. This is Tyler Deakey with the Bend MPO, and this is a meeting of our Technical Advisory Committee on March 4th. And let me just share my screen. So we start with a round of introductions here in the room. Who wants to start?
Hi, Eric Flint, Strategy Program Manager for Cascades East Transit.
Andrea Napoli, Bend MPO Senior Planner.
Neil Bonsgard, Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
Brian Potwin, Commute Options Executive Director.
I'm Eva Richardson. I'm the Transportation Options Coordinator with Commute Options.
David Green with County Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
All right, and online we have Quinn Keever. And Tarek Rawlings.
Hey everyone, Tarek Rawlings with Deschutes County.
Susanna Julber with the City of Bend.
Everyone, Susanna Jolber, City of Bend.
Ken Schotweiler with ODOT.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Casey Berg with OSU Cascades.
Morning.
And James Derope, one of our citizen members.
Hello, James here.
All right, did I miss? Oh, and then
Paul Dean.
yeah, Paul Dean with Bend McLean Schools. All right, I think I got everyone. So this is we're having issues. Hopefully we'll have our TV working here internally in a few minutes. The meeting's being recorded. Anyone online, if you have questions, please raise your hand and we will call on you as we jump into our topics. I don't think we have any public online right now, so I will move past that. Next agenda item is review and approval of the January 7th draft meeting summary. So just looking for a motion and a second to approve those minutes.
A motion to approve the January 2nd meeting minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye.
IT is gonna be a few minutes, so we'll have to.
With that, I'll turn it over to Andrea to talk about our state highway fund program.
Yeah, so, we're gonna be looking at the distribution of our state highway funds for fiscal years 2028, 29, and 30. And the reason why we're bringing this topic to you is that it's gonna be going to our policy board later this month. For them to decide on how these funds are distributed. So what we wanted to do is get the tax high level feedback on that. So we're not necessarily asking for a formal recommendation, but get some thoughts so that we can then, that will help us to create some funding scenarios to bring to our board later this month. So background, historically, the majority of our, so state highway funds or SHF funds, these used to be our STBG funds, Surface Transportation Block Grant funds, but now we're getting them as state funds. So you'll hear these two terms sort of interchangeably. So historically, these dollars, the majority of them have gone to City of Bend street preservation and maintenance. So when the MPO started, early 2000s, so 100% of those dollars went to street maintenance and preservation from 2004 through 2016. And then starting in 2016 through 2024, it was between 60 and 75% of those dollars. And then our last approval of our last 3-year cycle of funds, so for 25, 26, and 27, that's fluctuated between 45 and 48% have gone to the city. And we began distributing these dollars in 3-year cycles starting in 2020. At that time, we were doing it to coincide with our TIP, or our Transportation Improvement Program, which we have to update in that same 3-year cycle. Today, getting state dollars, we don't necessarily have to do that, but we found that for staff and for recipients of these dollars, it's easier to know, ahead of time that these dollars are coming. So I do have a table up that shows that I can describe it, that shows the breakdown for 2025, 26, and 27. So, and that was what the board approved in 2022. So essentially, around 45%, 45 to 48% of those dollars go to City of Bend Street preservation, and that's in the range of between $700,000 and $800,000 a year. 26 to 29% of those dollars goes to our competitive project application process at about $427,000 to $465,000 a year. And then we have amounts that we keep internally for our own work, for consultants, staffing, and that's between $350,000 to $370,000 a year, roughly 22% of those dollars. And then one other item is that our board is keeping a reserve of about 5% of those dollars, so around $80,000. So that's the last approved distribution for the funds for 25 through 27. Any questions on the background or request? Okay, so next slide, Tyler. So the description of the current recipient. So I was going to give like where this stands today. So City of Bend Street Preservation Program, as most of you know, in 2024, the TUF, or Transportation Utility Fee, was implemented to fund this program. However, phase 3 of the TUF is currently on hold. So as far as the future revenue there is uncertain. So they have been reliant on our funds in the past, and they may continue to be reliant on them. And then something else I wanted to mention is that the street preservation program is under the Transportation and Mobility Department for the City of Bend. and which also oversees the implementation of the low stress network and neighborhood greenways. And I know in the past, our board has potentially been, favorable to supporting those programs. And if that were to be the case, that would still benefit street maintenance because it would simply offset dollars that they would be receiving. And then, so the second item is our competitive project application process. So that's a criteria-based competitive funding program for smaller transportation projects. It's open to all of our jurisdictions, nonprofits, for transportation-related projects or programs within the MPO area. We do this every 2 to 3 years, and we'll be doing it again, a call for projects this fall. The majority of those dollars of the application, yeah, can you shut the door? Thanks. The majority of applications that we've gotten for our competitive project application process over these last 2 solicitations have been from City of Bend for bike, ped, safety related projects. And they've also received the bulk of the awards, but these dollars have funded parks projects, transportation options, as transit. I know there was a big ask a few years ago, but I think that project was pulled, but certainly they're open that we can receive applications from them. Historically, so in 2020, we had twice the amount of asks than funds that were available. And then in 2022, it was about equal. So the amount of money that we had available for it was about equal to how much the requests were. So our planning and staffing, that's another item we get distribution for. So those amounts are determined internally by staff based on how much we've spent in the past for consultants and staffing. So we expect that to hold steady at that about $370,000 a year. And similarly for our reserve, our board decides on the amount of that, and it's been 80,000 that we per year. We assume that amount will continue, and that's for expected and unexpected needs where we maybe need to save funding for. Any questions on these? Yeah, James?
That 80,000 in reserve, is that an ongoing number, or is there an account where that's just been increasing?
Yeah, there is. It does go into an account, and I know Tyler, you had mentioned talking about what these funds potentially be used for.
Yeah, so I think, James, this is relatively new for us. I think historically, we didn't have a reserve, because we didn't have the ability to have a reserve. There's a few things we're trying to build the reserve for, and we're still having discussions with our board about that, but we have future project needs that we know are out there. Our next long-range plan update will be coming up here in a couple of years, and we know we'll need some consultant support for that. There's a lot of work happening at the state level with our travel models and some of the analysis tools that we have, and moving those to the next generation so that we can be much, much better assess current and future transportation needs, and really taking the models from really being an auto-focused tool to being more of a multimodal focused tool. There's survey work that we know is going to be happening in the future. We know that with cost increases for projects over the last few years, inflation, we want to make sure we have a little bit of funding available so that if we award money to a project or a program, if those costs do increase, we have the ability to potentially add a little bit of additional funding to some of those awards. And then I think, and we'll be talking about it in a little bit, but there's a lot of uncertainty right now, obviously at the federal level, and wanting to make sure that we're building up a bit of a reserve fund, not knowing where things are going to be over the next few years. So does that answer your question, James?
It does. And then a follow-up. So is it the policy board that sets the determination of what when I look at these expenses, I sort of see sort of grant-based, and then I see sort of what do you call it? Infrastructure requirement. I mean, I consider like something like street preservation. I mean, that is something that the city of Bend is going to be doing. Are they essentially, does the policy board say we're going to give 50% of Bend to offset their basic street functions? Or is that something that would be up for debate?
I think,
Well, that's what we're looking for some direction on is, so for these future dollars, what's some input from the TAC on where they think that they could be best spent?
Okay.
To keep it, and that goes, that will be essentially is the next question. I put together a scenario based on how things have been funded. And do we want to project that out for those future funds, or should we be looking at potentially dedicating those funds towards something else?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna, one
Yeah.
quick thing. So I would say I just I went back a slide that has that table on it that shows the funding splits. I think one of the things we want to talk about and the board's interested in is that's City of Bend street preservation. Should we hold it at about that rough 45 to 50%, or should we change that? I mean, up or down? The MPO planning line item, we right now internally are we're doing some looking at what our potential costs are, and so that number could change, up or down a little bit. And then the reserve, also talking to our board, we're building out those estimates of how much funding we think we may need for some of our bigger projects in the future. And so all of these things are in flux a little bit right now. And I think, we're looking for this group to give us, some input that we can then take to the MPO board.
And one more important thing, and that's on the, Tyler, if you want to go ahead and move to the next slide after that.
Tyler, you guys have problems in here?
Yeah.
Something I work on now, or do you?
Yeah, you can come in now. Yeah.
Hate to interrupt everybody.
That's okay. We're can't get the our screen to show on the
Connect
this one.
Sorry.
Yeah, we'll move out of your way.
So do you want to go, Andrea?
Yeah, so
Can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
Is that, so that reserve, is that something that spending out of it is, proposals have to go to the policy board? Does it just is that decided by MPO staffing, or is there some other mechanism for how that actually gets decided? Or has that not really come up yet?
That hasn't come up yet,
Okay.
but I think one of the things that I said mentioned that we're doing is we know that we have our next plan update is due in 2029. So we're coming up, we're just building a simple summary of, we think that's going to cost X amount of dollars. The model's going to cost X amount of all those different things. We're starting to total those.
Okay.
And then also talking to them, do we want to set aside a little bit as a cost buffer or have a buffer out there that's available for projects that are awarded funding? If they see significant cost increases, what does that process look like to potentially move additional funding to already awarded projects? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then related to that, is there like similar kind of ongoing things? Are there any like requests or feedback from the streets and mobility or what department on their request of like what they're relying on, or is it just kind of a?
Yeah, so they certainly are still, because of this unknown with the phase 3 of the TUF, they're certainly still reliant on the MPO funds for maintenance and preservation. But they have expressed that, if the MPO wanted to instead direct those funds just to something in particular, like development of the low stress network, like greenways, that would still be fine with them, because then they would take the funds that would have been dedicated towards that and then move those towards street preservation. So
They have a plan B.
right,
basically.
yeah, so that still would benefit them.
Kind of equals out in a way.
Yeah.
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 Interesting. I'm curious how much you have in reserve right now. Do you know?
It's just the 80,000.
Just 80.
Just the one time.
Yeah,
This is the first
time we've done.
time.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And something else important to note is, so Tyler, if you go to the next slide, is that, so with our STBG dollars, we were getting about 1.6 million per year. Now that we have moved to state highway fund, or excuse me, with our STBG dollars, we were getting about 1.6 million per year. Now that we're getting state dollars, SHF dollars, it's about $300,000 less per year. So now we're working with less. So, and previously with STBG dollars, we would get a bump every year, but the SHF dollars are expected to remain flat. So we'd be getting about 1.4 million every year of state highway fund dollars for the foreseeable future.
Those typically from gas tax.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is the
Trying to
STBG
get this there.
intended, like, was it earmarked for the street preservation projects, or was that just been shook out?
That was how the board previously, they're still their discretionary dollars. So the policy board can send those however they want to. So they're not dollars that we get that have to be spent on one certain thing. The board can decide however they want to spend them.
Sorry.
So if we were, the bottom table here shows that knowing that we have $300,000 less per year, and if we were to keep the dollars to the reserve and to our planning and or to our consulting and staffing, if we kept those dollars consistent from what we had approved in 2027, and then those remaining funds, if we kept that proportion between street preservation and our project application process, the two things that we distribute funds to now, this is what it would look like. So the proportion would be the same, but the dollar amounts have gone down a fair amount. So for example, I think 2027 for street preservation, it was around 800,000. They'd be seeing more like 600. And then for our competitive project application process, it was about, I think about 425 for 2027. Now we're seeing it at 325. So I guess my first question is what are folks' thoughts on, this distribution? Should we potentially be looking at something different? That's really the information that we're wanting, so that we can then take a couple different scenarios to our board to get their discussion going.
James, you had your hand up first, I think.
Okay, this might take a second. So I was very involved with the city's marketing of the TUF. And I heard a lot of people comment on that. One of the things that was always controversial is most people don't understand the funding process or where money comes from for projects. And historically, there's always been a separation of, like, a bond is for infrastructure, and then there's operational costs, which comes from your base tax rates. If I was to look at the MPO as a completely outside source of funds, I would say that the City of Bend Street Preservation Program should be decreased significantly, and the MPO should focus more on grant-based applications. And that way the city doesn't get used to this money that may slowly be diminishing or whatever. And that way, when they're talking with the voters, they can say, look, the MPO has been doing this, but this money's up in the air. And then grants, the policy board and the TAC can look at every year going forward and say, well, we've got this much money, we can, pay for this, this, and this. But I think it should get away from basic operations, if to be blunt. And the 27% and the 6% for the staff and reserve, I'd say don't mess with that in any sort of long-term planning. But I could easily see switching the numbers of the 44 to 24 to 24, 44, or even, like I said, the City of Bend, they're not going to want to hear this, but street preservation should come out of basic operations, not relying on external grants. That's just my thoughts.
All right, thank you. Ken?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton of thoughts on this other than I did want to say that I think the MPO is doing a really good job at presenting this budget, and that 80, the whole concept of an MPO reserve, I think is much needed in this current funding climate. So I'd put a plug that 80K stay in that and be considered in the future.
Eric, I wouldn't go as far as James, but as the tough builds capacity, I would advocate drawing down that number like I think you guys are thinking of, but focus on building MPO's capacity, like you mentioned, with planning and all of the mandatory things that we have to do, because you guys are the backbone of a lot of what all our other agencies are doing. So the planning work that you do feeds into the work that we do.
And I'll add on that, I think in the past, we utilized some of these funds to help our partners with some of their planning projects. We provided funding to ODOT we helped pay for part of the US 97 Bend Parkway study. I think we helped fund part of the original CET Transit Master Plan that was developed, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And so I think looking out and seeing some uncertainty in our partners' funding, their funding scenarios, I think that may be an option for us as well, as to think about, does CET, does ODOT, does the city of Bend, need some supplemental funding to help make sure that they're able to do the planning that they need to do.
And also just looking forward to that, the city of Redmond is growing and still on a further horizon, but eventually the MPO might get bigger, and it'd be nice if you guys have the capacity to build forward on some of the big pie in the sky things, right?
I'd add that we hear from people in Bend almost every day about how difficult it is to get around Bend, cross major streets. And a lot of the problems we hear about are point projects that the Bend's Neighborhood Street Safety Program has not been able to fund. And I would really support James's idea of reducing the street preservation funds from the MPO and asking the city to use that money to experiment and try out low-cost methods of fixing point or relatively short linear projects, so that they can learn some techniques that they can use in the long run to improve the city streets. That won't really add to their maintenance needs dramatically, but it will give them some flexibility to practice and learn some new things.
Susanna?
Yeah, thanks. No, I appreciate everybody's comments, and yeah, I would agree that I think the city's street preservation allocation should be reduced proportionally, if not more, as those tough revenues come in. So that's my thoughts.
Right. Tarek?
Yeah, just brief. I was gonna just kind of echo what Ken was saying. I think that the reserve is really helpful, and I was just gonna say what Tyler had said earlier, that with kind of regional partners, uncertainty, things like that, it seems like a good idea for reserves just across the board. That was kind of my only initial thought.
All right, thank you. Quinn?
So just to follow up on Susanna's comment, Susanna, where would you want that proportion of the street preservation money to go?
Well, the table that's up right now, scenario based on projected current fiscal year 27 distribution, it shows each of those buckets kind of being proportionally reduced based on the expected amount for 28 to 30. So I was just thinking of keeping those same allocations. So I guess a little bit different than what James is saying. So proportionally
Susanna,
keeping
to
those
hold,
same.
to keep the proportions the same as they've been approved in the past. Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying? Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I thought you meant what James was saying, but then I was wondering where that money should go, but
Oh,
different.
got it.
Okay, got it.
I was just thinking keeping it the same.
Okay.
Brian?
I'm curious to hear from David Abbas about the potential reducing the street preservation dollars and what sort of not only impact, but plan that you could move forward with to offset that if that were to occur.
Good morning, everyone. Fighting the cold, cough, and congestion, so bear with me. The MPO has been a critical partner of digging our, selves out of the hole, I'll call it, and improving our street conditions over the past 10 years. The amount, that 700,000 is about 15% of our street preservation budget right now. And so when you think about that, we're talking 25 lane miles of chip seal or 40 lane miles of slurry seal. You get into the paving work, and that's smaller lane miles because of the expense. And so with the inflation, cost of materials, and those things going up, that's why we're at the point of a transportation utility fee to try to get some sustainable funds for street pres. We've only done phase one of kind of 3 planned phases. And so we're not quite there yet as far as the tough coming on board and being able to have these MPO dollars go elsewhere. And I've talked with Tyler and Andrea, before, definitely at phase 3 of the tough. Happy to sit down and let's put those funds elsewhere because I think we'd be in good shape. But phase 1 and phase 2 of the tough, a lot of it was keep the lights on, keep doing what we're doing with some, some improvements in certain areas. But phase 3 was where we're really able to kind of free up some resources and do some new things and the programmatic things. And, NSSP program is going to need some support in the future because once the GEO bond wraps up with that, it needs a sustainable funding source there. So currently, if that MPO contribution to street pres was to go away, there's not a new or a different funding source to replace it until the future phases of the tough come into play. And phase 3 of the tough is not in this next biennial budget conversation at this time. There'll be some discussions, I think, with council and things over the next couple of years, but it is not part of this next 2-year biennial budget at this time. Happy to help answer some questions if that didn't cover it.
Thank you, David. That's kind of what I was thinking about is how can we find a compromise? Because I definitely agree with what a lot of folks are saying about this, but street preservation, as he mentioned, just trying to dig out of the hole. Can we help get them out of the hole a little bit further and still be able to do a bigger change like this? That's where I would lean towards.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, and Andrea touched on it a little bit. We all have together did a good job, and it's a marathon, not a sprint race, of digging out of that hole. 10 years ago, our pavement condition index for the city was like a 67. Now we're at like a 76, 77. So we're headed in that direction. Inflation, COVID, pandemic, and all those things slowed us down this past couple of years, but we've held our ground, back on an improving trend now. Street preservation is a city as a whole, and 70% of the city is local residential roads. When these dollars were federal dollars and fund exchange, they were limited to arterial collector type work, whether that was paving or chip seal, whatever the treatment. That was also benefiting the bikes and ADA pedestrian when we're doing the ADA ramps. Now that state highway fund dollars, if it was the desire of the TAC and the policy board to still help with the street preservation program with the condition that it goes to neighborhood greenways or the low stress network locations, those key route kind of things where we can do some of that quick build, traffic calming and stuff like that. Happy to happy to do that because we have plenty of local residential roads and things out there that need that effort.
We go James. No.
Yeah, David, I just want to say thank you. The pavement condition across town is drastically improved. I've heard that from countless people. So that is a definite positive. I think what I really like the TAC and Tyler, when you're talking with the policy board moving forward, is essentially there's a major funding cut at the top of all of this that we're just sort of ignoring by looking at these percentages. And one of the things that I think we should recommend to our policy board representatives that the politicians is the state needs to address this concept of the state highway funding like tomorrow, not in 2 years, not in 4 years. Let's just stop pretending that we know we're going to keep getting money from gas taxes when every single policy they're enacting says we're going to get less and less and less money from gas taxes. So the reason why I think we should move more towards a grant-based project than an operations-based project is to get the politicians to force them to say, yes, we need to reevaluate these funding of all of these, of everything, of how the roads are funded. It, I think is the super big cloud hanging above all of us. It's not that I don't think the roads need to be fixed. I just think that people, once again, are very, the disinformation about where tax dollars come from and where they go needs to be much more upfront. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think, James, just following up on that, that's you raise a lot of great points that have been getting discussed for a very long time. And unfortunately, right now, I don't see at the state level or the federal level any significant change happening in the next couple of years. So yeah, I think we're going to be kind of stuck where we are for at least a couple more years, and then we'll see where things go from there. David? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask David Avis, what he thinks the street preservation program will look like when these funds come online in 2028, because that's 3 additional years of TAC funding for street preservation that's already in the pipeline, and what the needs will look like in 3 years after at least the first 2 parts of the TUF are in play.
Yeah, these numbers here shown on the screen, fiscal year 28, 29, and 30, those are what are up for recommendation to the policy board to change or not change. So for the next couple of years, this next biennium, we're okay. We're not losing that 15% or roughly help. It's out in the 28, 29, 30 timeframe that there's that opportunity to look hard at this, and if the phases of the transportation fee phase in as has been kind of planned and discussed, or if council wants to pursue a different funding tool or mechanism, that's maybe described in the transportation system plan. I know there's interest in tourism. How can the tourism better help the city of Bend and our transportation system, because they're using it as well. But that's a different tool likely to go to the voters. Local fuel tax, food beverage tax, seasonal food beverage tax, something along those lines. If we get out there, to answer your question, out to 28, 29, and this using the percentages here on the board of in that bottom chart, if that 600,000 was to go away and council does not go forward with phase 3 of the TUF, that's going to be noticeable for us. We'll have to try to, tighten up the belt and maybe we're reducing a program or bike program, ped program, capital replacement of equipment or something else in somewhere else to try to keep our street preservation conditions where they're at. I want to be on an improving trend. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a long game. I just want to be on an improving trend. But that if that goes away in 28, 29, 30, and there's not phase 3 of the TUF, we would feel that. If phase 3 of the tough comes through, happy to sit down with the TAC and Tyler and Andrea and everybody and Brooke and the policy board to see where these dollars are best, used.
Yeah, Neil.
Yeah, I like the discussion that I've heard. I do think that we've kind of talked about an alternative of shifting to project based rather than general funding as a potential area to explore, right? I guess I just wanted to pose another one that I think I may be kind of read into in the proposal and in what David said, that a lot of the street preservation program includes local streets and our key network roads. And so I guess this is a question for how complicated this funding process needs to be. But another option would be shifting some of those funds to be specifically earmarked for the greenways and those key routes. And that would ensure that those things are having funding priority instead of being cut, while still living within the general budget with that uncertainty. So I'm supportive of shifting some of that allocation from the street preservation section to try to highlight that policy desire, whether that's in projects or whether that's specifically earmarked. And I don't know the specifics of what would make that possible or effective or, whatever that is.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. With flexibility we have now to push those funds. Yes, in the past, we only spent for preservation was only on the arterial and collector system. And with the ability now to spend it on local streets. A lot of our LSM is focused on the local street network. And so the ability the board could make that decision to push those preservation dollars towards those types of projects. James?
Just a clarification, since we are talking about 28, 29, 30, and we're, as far as I know, still in 2025. This is state highway funds, but the primary source of state highway funds is the fuel taxes, correct?
Yes.
So all of that said, and this is a federal agency that we're dealing with the MPO. What would happen tomorrow? And this is sort of a question for David and Susanna. If literally some guy with a chainsaw comes and just says this budget's gone, what would the city do? Because I'm not asking that as a crazy hypothetical, because I'm watching it happen all around the country now with agency after agency, billions of dollars after billions of dollars, for the sole purpose of watching things get caught up in court cases. Let's switch to 2025. What happens to the city if the MPO planning and consulting staff remains or doesn't, but the other 900,000 or $1 million just goes boom? Question.
James, when you just said the 900,000, I mean, are you asking if the state fuel tax revenue source was to go away altogether, or these dollars here that we're looking at on the screen?
Well, I'm assuming the state would scramble if the federal level changed even 0.01%. And I'm wondering if the state in that scramble, one of the first things that they would do would be to cut MPO funding, because it's now a state highway fund allocation, so that they could maintain, what they would say is more operational on their side. Because this is truly, the MPO, from what I understand, seems to be completely discretionary. Like, okay, we have this little bit of funds. We want to give people a say in what happens, but what percent of these funds represent the state highway fund allocations? I mean, 1%, 0.5%? What's the state
So are
highway?
we anticipating that this program would be cut in order to backfill other state programs then?
That's sort of a general question. Yeah. Or am I reading this wrong?
For 28 through 30, those are pretty set. I don't see those
I mean, I think, yeah, there's a chance
Yeah, I mean,
that ODOT could push and say, hey, we're gonna pull back these funds. But these funds are distributed. They have an agreement. Oh, there's an agreement between ODOT, the League of Oregon Cities, and the Association of Oregon Counties on how these funds are distributed. And, particularly well, I mean, all counties and all cities are heavily relying upon these to help with their operations and maintenance budgets. And if there was any sort of pullback in these funds, I think LOC and AOC they would fight that, very much to try and at least maintain the funding that we have. So, I mean, James, there's always a possibility that could happen, but ODOT would be in for a pretty significant fight, I think, from the other entities that are signatories on that agreement.
That's fine. I just need to hear it from a staff member. As a citizen, it's scary.
Yeah, if anybody knows, I mean, ODOT is they're in a pretty dire financial situation. And, I think there was some something may still happen in this legislative session. The idea was that there was probably going to be some sort of big transportation funding bill was going to happen in the state legislative session. I think based on events that happened just over the last week or so, it seems a lot less likely that that's going to happen. And so the next biennial funding cycle for ODOT is going to be very tight, I think, and they're going to be doing layoffs and cutting back on their preservation program and those kind of things if there's no new funding source created. So
What happened this week that made the transportation funding come off the table?
Funding scandal.
Okay,
yeah, there was
I heard that.
$1 billion discrepancy in their funding budget or in their budget. And they don't have a way to backfill that at this point. So Susanna?
I was just gonna say, to add on to James' comment, I mean, we don't know what's gonna happen. And Tyler, I think you're gonna talk a little bit about that in the next agenda item or so, but I think if we were to see those drastic cuts type that type of nature, it would be up to council to reprioritize where our transportation funding dollars would be spent and what priorities we'd focus on. I don't know, David, if you have anything to add, but I don't think it would be a bigger picture kind of conversation because it would definitely change level of service and our PCI goals and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, you're right, Susanna. I mean, if there's a major, cutback of either these MPO dollars or state fuel tax, because we have a different buckets of resources supporting the Transportation Mobility Department and the streets and operations. There's the state fuel tax, which has been, stagnant, if not declining over, recent years. So there's a state fuel tax, or some general fund support. There's the MPO support, and state fuel tax currently is historically about 40% of our budget. So if there was a major cut, it would be, kind of okay, regroup and prioritize what level of service are we going to, impact.
So I think I've got enough information from the group, and correct me if I'm wrong. So what I heard is that, we'll want to keep the planning comp the same, keep the reserve. As far as dollars going to street preservation, I heard a little bit of some dollars should potentially go to grants and or some funding stay with the city, but instead be moved towards local street projects like the LSN or greenways, so that those dollars would still remain and offset street preservation. Have I captured that correctly? Okay.
Anything else?
Well, we do have one other slide for next steps.
Okay.
So sorry, this is so small, but these are the next steps for our SHF program schedule. So right now we're looking at the distribution of the funds. In the next couple months, we're gonna be notifying eligible entities that we will have some dollars towards a application process, which will call for projects will start this fall on September 1st. The window will close on October 1st, and then we'll work with the TAC and the policy board to award those dollars specific to the project solicitation. And yeah, that's all I have for this topic.
Right. Anybody else have any questions for Andrea before we move on?
So the award, the project proposals that you're gonna do this fall are for 28, 29, and $30.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
We just have a few minutes left, and I just have a couple of slides. Talk a little bit about just where we are with the federal update. I think everybody knows it's a pretty dynamic situation right now, and we're getting things changing and directives changing, sometimes on a daily basis, and even sometimes twice a day. We're getting, feedback from our federal highway partners as well as ODOT. So there's the executive orders, still trying to understand what some of those executive orders mean in terms of how funding is being distributed. There's departmental directives from the United States Department of Transportation that are impacting some funding situations. And then I mentioned, regularly changing guidance. We are hearing different things on different days, from different people on a very regular basis. So it's trying to keep track of everything has been a little bit challenging. Current impacts, and I think all these are accurate, and I'll put Eric on the spot in a second, but so funding from the federal level, once it's it's called obligated, is the funding if it's been made available to an entity to use. That's called obligation. If the funding's been obligated, for the most part, those funds are available for use by states and others. Unobligated funding for electric vehicle infrastructure is all currently frozen. The current infrastructure bill, IIJA, includes a large number of discretionary grant programs. Any grants that haven't been obligated are also frozen. And so I know locally, one of the impacts of that, I believe, the city received a grant for the railroad overcrossing on Reed Market Road. I believe that grant is currently frozen. Some congressionally directed spending is frozen, and that's earmarks from Congress. And I know that there's earmark funding coming into Bend for a number of things. And I think some of that funding may be currently frozen. As of last week, transit STIP amendments were frozen. I don't know has that changed?
We're waiting to hear from ODOT and looking to TriMet as they have lawyers that we don't to understand the situation a little better. But and it's not just that, flap funding as well. We had replacement vehicles for Mount Bachelor ski buses on deck, and that is frozen. So, yeah.
And then I think also the last bullet there, anything that's climate related or equity related has almost all been stripped off of the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration websites. And I think the challenging part of that is that under current legislation and the regulations associated with that, we still have to do some of those things, but the guidance documents have all been stripped away. So waiting to hear what we need to do or not do, well, with respect to those in those two areas, especially. Potential future impacts. I think the big thing, the bill that we're operating under now, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, expires in September of 2026. The Senate held its first hearing, I think, last week on starting discussions about what the next multi-year transportation bill is going to look like. I highly expect, or fully expect, that the new bill is going to have different focus areas and funding priorities. And I think some of the programs that are in IIJA today will likely just simply disappear under the new act. Keep hearing as well. So there's the IIJA, there's the legislation, but then how it's implemented is through the Code of Federal Regulations. And I've been hearing that the there's going to be potentially a lot of regulatory change coming. And the administration is trying to speed some of those regulatory changes along. We don't know yet what that looks like or how it's going to impact us, and that'll probably play out over the next, year to 2 years, I suspect. So that's, I think, the potential future impacts. And then I know, Eric, you mentioned some local impacts. Are there any other local impacts that people are dealing with that they want to share with the group?
Well, one thing that I'm looking for is, like you said, we're still required to meet these regulatory obligations, whether it's climate legislation or, in our case especially, ADA requirements, right?
Yeah.
We are required to serve disabled passengers and everything that comes along with that. But with the landscape shaking out the way things are, a big chunk of that money might disappear. So it will turn into something like an unfunded mandate where we still have to do the work. We'll still be open to liability lawsuits, but we won't have federal funding to support doing the work. So that's still TBD because it's a shifting landscape and no clarity at this moment.
Tarek?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just thanks for the discussion, everyone. I do have another meeting right at 11, so I was just gonna hop off. But thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you. Thanks. Anybody have any questions or just other comments?
One more thing to add, related to that is, so today we're gonna be sending out to the TAC our work program, our draft work program that we had presented to the TAC back in January, a very high level presentation. But just to note that because of some of this federal guidance, we have had to strip out certain language around climate equity, although our work tasks remain unchanged. So that's what's different between prior drafts and to the draft that you'll get today. But we're asking for you to take a look at that.
Thank you.
But just heads up on that.
All right. We're right at 11. So if anybody wants to stay on, if they have any major, quick updates they want to share with the group. Have anything, Carmen?
Yeah, just to quickly introduce our new transportation options coordinator, Eva Richardson. Throw her in the deep end. It's her second week and she's meeting lots of people, and I thought I'd have her come and meet the MPO and all the good folks here. So that's a addition to our team working on Get There platform and reducing single occupancy vehicle trips within pretty much everything east of the Cascade Range. So she's got a lot on her plate.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
I can quickly just summarize. We've got a lot of stuff going on, but if you tune into the COIC board meeting, 5:30 this Thursday, you'll probably hear most of it covered. We're going to be increasing recreation fares for summer services. We're building towards bringing back fares system-wide, targeting October for that. Considering expansion routes in Bend, Route 8 would be in the Northeast, but there is still some discussion whether we should prioritize that or frequency or other priorities. Also developing a new logo and have other big projects in the works, but tune into the COIC board meeting and Bob Townsend will brief that.
Neil.
The Deschutes County BPAC, really probably David should be giving this update, but we're having our Tri-County Bicycle Pedestrian Summit on April 10th at the Bend Parks and Rec office. Is that what you were going to say? Okay, great. David has planned it, so I just wanted to make sure to come mention.
And MPO is providing funding for the location, so we really appreciated that. And I should mention that Brian has Commute Options has ponied up money for the yes, it's the audio visual part of that. So thanks Commute Options for that. Community event.
Yeah. And to invite, pass the word around. After the meeting too. Thanks,
All
y'all.
right. Yeah, so our next meeting is April 1st. We will You'll be looking for an agenda probably about a week in advance of that. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.